Hello, everyone. I'm Rhys. You pronounced it wonderfully. Thank you. I'm not sure who put the scheduling together, but next time I think I'll ask to go before Richard because that was very good. So from one random English bloke to another. First, I wanted to say thank you, everyone, for staying so long. I know if this was an in-person conference, everyone would have gotten a drink at the break before last. So while I introduce myself, please feel free to get yourself a beer or some non-alcoholic beverage before I start chatting away. This is the last talk, so I'm thinking of it for myself as a sort of closing keynote for my own ego, but really it's just the last talk. So I'll just get started. The title of this talk, as you can see, is Arm Yourself with an Ecosystem of Linux Apps. Soon, the abstract for this talk was soon the likes of Apple's M1 chip won't cost an arm and a leg. In the not too distant future, adding ARM support to your applications is going to be crucial for reaching users both old and new. And with everything happening with Apple and with the acquisition of ARM by NVIDIA potentially coming soon, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ubuntu's plan for support and how you can start testing and developing for ARM using software and workflows that you're using today already. So let me just close the chat here so I don't get too distracted. And we can dive in. Next slide. Okay, cool. So first I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Rhys Davies. I'm a developer advocate for Ubuntu, for Canonical. I've been in this role for a few months now, where I've joined the community team, the rebooted community team, I should say, at Canonical, focusing specifically on supporting and helping the Ubuntu community grow and enable them to do things. Before that, I was a product manager for Canonical for about a year and a half, where I looked after numerous different products over there, from robotics and IoT type things and snaps to a little bit of desktop, a little bit of multipass, some virtualization stacks, that kind of thing. So I covered a lot of the landscape, and along the way, I very much drank the open source Kool-Aid. And it was part of the reason I joined the company and joined Canonical in the first place. But then the more I got into it, the more I enjoyed, the more I saw the value in what folks like you do and what open source is about and open source principles. And I really sort of got inspired. And then a couple of other things about me. I like books. I like reading. I'm a bit of a big old book nerd when it comes to reading and writing. I joined the circus for a few months, not terribly long ago. I ran away with the circus, and the little groovy gorilla down there was the Ubuntu release that I last sort of led, and I've got a little Ubuntu t-shirt here. I just want to say as well, before I get into the rest, the meat of the presentation, while Richard's story before me was very good and very interesting and very real, mine's a bit more of a thought experiment, a bit more of a fiction. So yeah, let's go. All right. The animations didn't work terribly well. Okay. Once upon a time. So yeah, so I'm going to be telling you a little bit of a story. So bear with me if it starts to get a bit weird. Once upon a time, in a hole in the ground, in a cupboard under the stairs, in a galaxy far, far away, or on GitHub, I want everybody to imagine a developer. She is like many of us. Maybe she has a job. Maybe she works for a tech company. Maybe she works in a corner shop. It doesn't really matter. But she's just getting started in app development. Let's say she spends her time surfing the web, scrolling through projects, looking at open source repos, looking for something to contribute to. And she has an idea. She wants to build an app. Whatever that app is, it doesn't matter. Let's just say it's any app. For now, let's say it's a command line tool that, I don't know, tracks the stocks that she's invested in. We'll call it Stonker. Just for the sake of this presentation, since it's the last one, and we can have a little bit of fun. That was supposed to be an animation on the screen, so it's a bit of a surprise, but there we are. She does this in her free time, after work, on the weekends. She really wants to build something of it, help people track their stonks. Maybe she wants to roadmap some work to add a feature to crawl Reddit for the next opportunity to stick it to the man in the future. Maybe even build a community around her app. But that's all down the road. The first problem is just where to start. For the sake of this story, for the sake of this presentation, let's say this is her first time developing an app, an open source app. That way we can look at what's out there a little bit more and really dig into a first-timer's experience and really examine the whole process a little bit. I'm sure we've all been there. I know I have, where we have this idea, maybe a project idea, maybe something we want to contribute to, and we go hunting for where to start, where to begin, how to begin, quite importantly. And well, so let's have a look at what she might find. Here we see our first sort of plot twist. How do you get started? Well, where would you begin? I think we need more articles about this kind of thing, about where to begin with Linux apps. If you just search how to develop an app, if you don't know anything about Linux, and for this case, obviously, we're assuming that we don't know anything about Linux, you would find yourself in a rabbit hole of mobile apps. I didn't take any screenshots, only because it looked a bit weird on the slide, so I did what we did here. Apologies for the funky colors. I'm not a designer. This is no other filters. Of course, if she knew she was interested in Linux, maybe she would have added Linux, but maybe she wouldn't as well. If she went off on her first search, here she'd end up down the mobile app rabbit hole and would have found her way to iOS or Android long before she would have thought about Linux. It seems like any bloggers out there have a nice SEO target with this. Even when I searched desktop, as you can see here specifically, it was all Windows documentation, and that's Windows documentation. And in my personal opinion, those docs aren't particularly good, very attractive looking. So this is sort of my first call to action. I'll get into the point of this talk in a second, I promise. We need more visibility on developing Linux apps in terms of documentation and writing and blog posts and people talking about it. If we want first timers to go down the good, happy Linux rabbit hole, and I think we do, let's start targeting getting started blogs at specific keywords or building up the Google Juice weightings of sites that are doing this already. I'm not sure if you'll get these slides after the event or not, but there's a nice URL at the bottom of it. You can see there of the search results that only came up when I looked for, which was the only Linux related thing that I came up when I searched this, actually, which was makealinux.app. I'm sure some of you will have seen it before, or even maybe even had a hand in building it, but it's a place to go, a place to start. It's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for in terms of distribution of people, but we also need people talking about the apps that they're making. And conferences like this are an awesome thing for doing that. It just needs to translate into Google Juice, right? My contact details are at the end of this presentation. If you're writing a Linux app blog or creating Linux app content and would like a hand optimizing for this kind of thing, you can just let me know. Anyway, this is the Linux App Summit. So let's move past this. Let's say she finds her way to open source, maybe to Linux, but more importantly, she finds her way to open source communities, somewhere she can do her work in the open. And if she runs into issues, there are active forums for questions and users for contributions. She hasn't got time for courses, let's say. She just wants to get stuck in. So she looks for tutorials, right? Documentation, maybe YouTube videos, surely. I know I would. Now, this is where we need a little bit of suspension of disbelief. She's reading through the documentation. She's watching the YouTube videos, getting inspired. There's a lot of interesting things going on, but in her search, she's looking for something new, something exciting, something that she can get ahead of and really try something. Now, this is a bit of a jump, but maybe she sees certain developers she follows on Twitter, say, raving about the M1 chip. More specifically, she finds maybe the Apple MacBook Air with an M1 chip. People talking about that, for better or for worse. Ooh, she thinks, right? It's the new shiny. It's interesting. It's performant. Okay. It's Apple. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. It's expensive, which is a pain. It's got an ARM processor. Hello. That's interesting. She realizes, wait a minute, what would have to be, that would have to be a whole new class of application, right? It would have to be built for this hardware, built for ARM hardware. So she searches around, what's up with ARM, right? And no, we don't. Let's try ARM Silicon, because this isn't what we're here for. It was all Apple. Apps on ARM Silicon just gives you everything Apple, or at least it did for me in my location. Now, Now that's doing a good job of articles. Apple have really sort of cornered this one. Maybe if there are any people out there amongst you who want to start writing documentation or tutorials for Linux app development on ARM, this is another sort of SEO sort of Google target for you. And again, I'd be happy to help juicing those articles for Google, because it looks like we need a lot more visibility for the apps keyword in general. But let's say, for the sake of brevity, she finds herself on the NVIDIA news, right? She goes looking for an ARM-specific content, and perhaps the Fable algorithm throws up a news article. Now, of course, she's heard of NVIDIA, right? Who hasn't? She knows they do crazy GPU stuff, right? Cool. NVIDIA's acquiring ARM. Oh, now that is something she picks up on. That's something that's quite interesting. Blink, next slide. Okay, so this could be serious, right? Not just sort of fruit associated with Apple. Wait. Okay, so she realizes the implications of this. Even if we just zoom in on Linux and desktop applications, if folks like Apple are already moving towards desktop class ARM hardware, you can bet your bottom dollar other hardware vendors are working on it too. Equally, you can bet NVIDIA have noticed. I've seen a lot of good things about it, but that really doesn't matter. The point is, with ARM, a company partners with just about everybody: Microsoft, Intel, Qualcomm, Apple, Amazon, IBM, Nintendo, and so on. On embedded devices, getting leveled up by sort of NVIDIA's GPUs and servers and supercomputer stacks, you can be sure that embedded devices will get smarter. And workstation vendors will be able to leverage that technology. And it means that Linux will be coming to embedded devices and ARM desktops, certainly, which is all on its way, right? So what's missing over there? As ever, it's apps, right? Building new or adapting old Linux apps for ARM is going to become crucial. And she recognizes this. Let's say she recognizes this in our presentation. So she thinks, okay, what else is ARM? How can we learn more? So she discovers ARM is typically for the embedded space, right? Okay, phones, nice. Fridges, that's cool. Tablets, that's interesting. IoT devices, that's buzzwordy. But where's the innovation right now? She looks around and it's cloud, right? It's Amazon Graviton 2. There's a 2. Edge compute, clustering, blah, blah, blah. Okay, she's convinced there's definitely a future in this. So she decides to dig in. Now, I'm aware this isn't normally how application development goes. People don't usually decide on the architecture first, I'd presume. I'm not a developer, so I wouldn't know specifically, but just bear with me. We'll get to that. So she wants to start developing for this, shall we say, non-standard architecture for desktop apps. So she definitely wants to do that, but she wants to get ahead of the curve. Break new ground. Maybe she could turn it into a mobile or embedded app later. On the face of it, it looks hard, especially to a beginner. There's not a lot of tutorials or examples out there at the moment. And as we've seen, what does exist is Apple. Maybe there are paid-for courses, but that's no good to her. Maybe it becomes expensive. You very quickly find articles telling you that you need an ARM device to build ARM on. Does that mean she has to buy the M1 to develop desktop apps? Does that mean you have to build in the cloud? Is there no way around that, or is there no way to build for ARM on another architecture? Okay, she thinks, okay. This is a lot. So she thinks, let's try and start at the bottom, right? ARM is a company. Maybe they have a place to start. Okay, good. They do. There's forums, there's docs, perfect. So you have to scroll through, but it's a lot about embedded stuff, not necessarily applications, but there's no need to panic. There's a Linux section. Okay, it's not super helpful, but right, Linux. ARM is still very embedded. Apps are a couple of layers up. Linux. This is a good sign. ARM have their docs ready. There's a lot of debugging and Docker, but not so much for what she's looking for just yet. So she goes looking for Linux apps. And I'm pleased to say she found this conference when she was looking for Linux apps. But since this talk is about Linux apps for ARM, let's focus over there. And what I mean by that is when I searched for Linux apps, I found references to this conference. So that's very, very good. So the first thing she finds is a Reddit thread talking about Ubuntu. And I thank goodness for that, since that's what I'm advocating for. And then later on, there is a thread on this website raspberrypi.org, which is interesting. She thinks maybe there's like a super active niche community for making baking apps. Yeah, I know she would know about the Raspberry Pi, unless she was living under a bridge, but jokes about baked goods are fun, and I'm pretty sure those guys like it. So she thinks to herself, can I do this? Can she do it? Can you get ahead of this kind of curve and write applications for ARM that will run on Graviton and that will run on the M1 chip? Apps that cater for the incoming ARM-based future, if that happens. Maybe she can get ahead of the ARM apps ecosystem. Maybe she can make ARM the first-class citizen of her app, but of course build up and around on other architectures as well. Maybe she can even write tutorials and documentation and become something of an influencer in this space before it really even takes off. It's safe to say, I think, that pretty soon ARM-based hardware won't cost an arm and a leg. And it doesn't even at the moment, right? And NVIDIA may well bring it to every developer on the planet in a not terribly distant future. So can she do this? Spoiler alert for this fictitious talk, she can, but she needs to start making some decisions. Let's open some ARM docs in tabs that will likely never close until our computer crashes, and every other thing we find linked to all over the shop. ARM, Ubuntu, there are links to Snapcraft and Launchpad on the screen here, but we'll get to that stuff later, don't worry. GitHub, Raspberry Pi. Okay, so she thinks next, let's get ourselves into the forums and over onto the YouTubes. Maybe she spots this new ARM software developers channel, which you can see on screen here. This is a neat little software developers YouTube channel from the advocacy or the developer relations teams over there at ARM, and it talks about what's going on with ARM, what partners and community people are doing, what they're working on, and most importantly, it talks about developing software for ARM. They have a series on game development at the moment. They do live streams. It's pretty cool. Okay, it doesn't matter. I'm not. Okay, anyway. So she finds that. That's a good thing. That's good. That's good, interesting stuff. That's ARM support. That's the ARM knowledge taken into account. And then she looks to learn more about Ubuntu. Ubuntu is nice and it's free and it's good. And there are Ubuntu images for ARM. That's good for if she wants to start developing natively. She pops into the Ubuntu discourse to see what's going on. It's a very active discourse, lots of people talking about lots of different things. Well, there's not an ARM specific section. There is a desktop category where people talk every day, and a community category, which is where I live, where she can raise her ideas and talk about what she wants to do and how she wants to contribute. Great. Okay, that's the architecture and Linux taken care of. But I think there's something in between, right? Okay, good. There is support for the baked goods in Ubuntu. That's good. There is a Raspberry Pi support when she wants testing. And there's a community here of developers to help with issues. Okay, stepping back, she's got Ubuntu, Raspberry Pi. Yes, and both of those things are in as expensive as it's going to get anyway, so that's something. And it's perfect for testing ARM applications. And there's Ubuntu support. Great, we're ready to go. Reading around on Ubuntu and getting Ubuntu on a Raspberry Pi, she runs into these snap things. She reads packaging. Write an app, package it, and build it to run on a heap of architectures, including ARM. Huh, okay. She can do this. She can see the path, so she writes her Stonker app. Yeah, I remember. It's called Stonker. Okay, like I said, I'm not a I get the idea here and with developers on their apps, etc. But I'm not an app myself, and everyone listening likely knows more than me. I'm not going to talk through the creation process, but I'll talk a little bit how to operate for ARM and for source. So let's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and it's about done. She's written her Stonker app. Okay, so for the sake of this talk, we'll say she used Flutter. Just quickly, for those who don't know, Flutter is a Google's UI toolkit for building natively compiled applications for mobile, web, and desktop. She's focused on ARM, but cross-platform and multi-platform support is always a win. Of course, it could be some other nice cross-platform. Maybe it's Electron. If you're interested in Electron instead, I hope I'm saying your name right. Pradeep gave a very interesting talk on building apps with Electron earlier today. I think that was today. So maybe she would find that documentation instead. It really doesn't matter. Let's say she wrote it on her Ubuntu workstation, because come on, I work for Canonical, and she used VS Codium. Note that that's Codium, not VS Code. Codium is not a fork; it's a repository of scripts to automatically build Microsoft's VS Code into freely licensed binaries with a community-driven configuration. You should absolutely check it out, and just like that, she's ready to go. She can build her application and get things going. Now, I know I skipped over those two things quite quickly, Flutter and VS Codium, but like I said, I'm not a developer, and we're focused on the higher level sort of story journey here. There's more information about Flutter on the Ubuntu blog. VS Codium is a snap that you can find in the Snap Store, and there's lots of talks at this conference alone that you could watch, for example, Pradeep, like I already mentioned, or maybe Tobias's talk at the very, very beginning on adaptive apps with GTK. So lots of options. I'm not recommending necessarily these things. It's just these are the options that I would have gone for, let's say. So we have Stonker on GitHub. Maybe I shouldn't have called it Stonker. It's an open source project because, of course, it is. And maybe it has one or two other contributors who helped her out in the forums. Okay, great. But really, that's the fun part done, right? The bulk of the work is done. Oh dear, she thinks. Deploying Linux apps. Is she going to start thinking about packaging now? Okay. She holds her breath and she dives in. But of course not. Helpful commentary starts to get a little bit less responsive. Linux apps are great. That's why we're all here, right? That's why this conference is named after them. Linux packaging is typically less great. She finds a lot about how to package your software, a lot of toxicity, a lot of options, of course. Why can't you just compile a Linux binary? Yeah, no, okay. Maybe she can get it into the kernel. No, that's silly as well. We've all heard Linus talk about that by now. So we run into a hurdle, right? We want to build this thing for Linux because obviously, and we want to build it for ARM for the reasons we've discussed. But of course, there's more than ARM is a bonus, but ARM is what we want. So she starts to flounder. Handcuffed or restrained by choice, what does she choose? RPM, Flatpak, app image, snap, deb, blah, 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 blah. She reads up, she finds some pretty good documentation for each format, communities who are definitely passionate about what they're doing, but the days start ticking by. She doesn't want to pick one and then regret it. She's an app developer, right? Not a software packager. It looks like this is another call to action for me to everyone listening in the future or live, because I want to be right on the nose with this one. I'll just sort of say it. We have a lot of baggage in the Linux app ecosystem. Everyone's talks over the past few days that I've seen, at least, have been really interesting in improving the experience of learning how to do things better or more efficiently, but not a lot to address that I've seen, a lot to address the baggage when it comes to packaging. Now, of course, this presentation is going to go in a sort of packaging direction, and I'm not here to start fights. What we need is a sort of an objective measurement of what packaging is best for what use cases, and then work on that sort of wider support. Okay. I touch on this again later, but if representatives of packaging formats want to talk, the Ubuntu community team, then I am a part of, would love to sort of join the discussion. Anyway, right, she's in this hole, this packaging hole, right? Enter plot twist number 2. Hopefully, enter one of you folks. She drops her concern in a forum. It doesn't matter where. She just drops it in a forum. And lo and behold, a trusted advisor, a community leader, maybe one of you good folks, responds with something like this. Packaging and distribution of a mess. The options can be good, and they're all good for different reasons. Just remember, it's the app that matters. And thanks for writing it for Linux. So what are your goals? What's your use case? And we'll see what packaging is right for you. Blink, blink. Thank you, anonymous community leader. So she wants this to work on Linux, but most importantly, she wants it to work on ARM. So the packaging has to have ARM support. She wants it to become a thing and keep developing. So she wants to have easy way to update it. And of course, security is important too. It is. So this community leader is going to recommend to her snaps because again, of course they are. But let me reiterate, the packaging is less important than the app here. Plus, my friend and colleague Igor gave a nice talk about snaps earlier in the event, yesterday afternoon for me. So you'll all know all about them by now, and they're pretty cool, and they're a nice fit for this use case. So she gets into the docs. Here we go. There's a lot of documentation around snapping an app, snapping a Flutter app specifically, and some nice articles written by some first-timers. That one's by me. She learns that snapping an app for ARM is not only possible, but is already being done all over the Snap ecosystem. Quick digression again here, just in case you don't know, snaps are application containers that bundle libraries and dependencies inside themselves. You can integrate packaging snaps with your CI/CD pipelines. You can take advantage of the Snapcraft extension for specific kinds of middleware. I actually know a couple of folks who build ROS, robotic operating system snaps for their robots. And once the application is snapped, it can be available on the Snap Store to run on any Linux distribution that runs Snap systemd, and so that it can be kept up to date and maintained and promoted and so on. Okay. Next, she would have to write her YAML. This is effectively the Snap itself. It's where all the plugs and interfaces get added and where you can make the app strictly confined. This comes from the early days when snaps were built and designed for IoT devices and to run on embedded architectures like a phone. This strict confinement is what gives snaps their sort of container nature. So where LXC or something of that ilk could be seen as a sort of machine container, a Docker container could be seen as a sort of process container. A snap can be seen as sort of an application container, right? They package code and dependencies, like I mentioned before, into an sort of isolated and immutable. So they're isolated and immutable with a writable area separated from the rest of the system, but visible to the host. And now I'm not going to go and keep giving the spiel and selling snaps, but you can be sure they're a good choice for ARM applications, especially one like Stonka. So she makes Stonka strictly confined because why not? She guesses security is important. I know I've heard it from lots of folks, and yes, security is important. She guessed right. And we move on to the next slide. And then she builds it remotely. So this is a Snapcraft feature that lets you build on someone else's computer. It's a super nifty and easy way if you want to actually do things with your computer while things build and it doesn't take up all your resources. Everything's built on Launchpad, so you can drain that Canonical infrastructure instead of your own. There is sometimes a queue, but rarely does it take that long. Anyway. Okay, so let's say her build works. It's good. It spits out numerous images, including an AMD 64 image and NARM image. She tries it on her laptop. She tries the AMD 64 image on her laptop. Okay, that one works. But that's not what she cares about, right? What she cares about is the ARM architecture, as we have discussed. So she fires up Ubuntu on her Raspberry Pi 400, as you can see on the slide here. Okay, it works there too. She installs it, it runs, she tests it, it's good. Not just the 400, of course. Ubuntu server is certified to work on all the Raspberry Pis with a higher version number than 2, and Ubuntu desktop works grand on Pi 4s, Pi 400s, and naturally the desktop needs the 4 GB model minimum, but it works. Little sort of side note there because I worked on that stuff. Where was I? Okay, so she can get herself on this accessible ARM hardware, Raspberry Pis, Raspberry Pi 400s, whatever it is, and she's confident because there's 2 communities around it, Ubuntu and Raspberry Pi, that will work, and she'll be able to test these things if they're not developed natively, because she'll be able to do the remote build system, which will build on ARM, or she could test natively. So She kicks the tires. She makes sure that everything she wants the app to do works. Good. Maybe she gets in touch with me or one of my colleagues to talk about testing. We've run testing days in recent history of for the Ubuntu images themselves. There's no reason she couldn't, if she wanted to, start an app testers thread herself or a group and crack on with some sweet application testing. She goes to the Snap store and she reserves the name Stonker. Starting to regret the name. And she builds for every architecture. She sends them to the global Snap store. Next slide. She hooks it up to her GitHub repo with a few clickety-clacks, such that every time she pushes to her GitHub repo, it triggers a new build that is pushed to the store. That could be straight to her Stonker users or to another channel for personal testing or her community testing that she's now set up and is going with. Good. Sigh. So she sits back, but then she sits back up again, right? Because of what I was talking about before, she makes her Snap landing page look nice. She writes a blog post about her experience. She links to the Snap landing page and the documentation that she found and the sites that she found, and really starts to build this hyperlink trail, not a paper trail, a hyperlink trail. Then, because again, she wants to do this properly, she pops into the Snapcraft forum and she talks about what she's done. I see it, me, Rhys. I put it up there on the features Snap section on the Snap store because it's a pretty damn cool app. And it goes up a few hundred users, maybe a few thousand users. And hold the phone, she thinks to herself, is that it? Right? Let's check. She has her app. It's open source. It's hosted on GitHub. Nice. There are a couple of contributors because along the way, she found people in the forum, but she can always call for more contributions. She's in the right forums now. It's just a matter of, hopefully, it's just a matter of putting the word out there. Her GitHub repo is hooked up to Snapcraft, so she can keep her app up to date. She can trigger builds for all of the architectures that's relevant to her. And each time we do, we can install the Snap on our Raspberry Pi, kick the tires, test it works, or do the whole process from the beginning on a Raspberry Pi in the first place anyway. Did she just arm herself with a Linux app? Did she just contribute an app to the Linux ecosystem that is going to be able to run on the NVIDIA ARM developer hardware of the future? I think she did. Now, if you go through this whole process of building your app already, and it already exists, you really didn't need to listen to most of my presentation. But if you have similar goals to our protagonist, updatability, cross-district support, ARM support for the new world on the horizon, you should check out Snaps too. Give yourself a hand and an arm. ARM support for applications, I think, is going to be crucial for reaching out to users, but not just crucial for getting new users, but it could be an opportunity for the Linux ecosystem in general, right? Naturally, there was a lot of snaps in this presentation, and while snaps have a lot of benefits and pros, especially when building for ARM architectures, especially for security and updatability, of course there are other ways. We've heard lots about Flatpak. We've heard lots about a lot these past few days. So again, think back to the trusted advisor, the community leader mentioned, who appeared this talk. The powerful quote that I just coupled together. It not figuring out with the for packaging. So, next slide. In summary, what I highlight here were three things. Despite events like this and the work everyone at this conference does, apps on Linux, I'm sure everyone knows, are lacking ability. Next time, you can or a blog tutorial, or even do a video about app development. A moment to think about how a application to find your content. And think about what route a new user would have to take. Right? Look at those more accessible. We all can and we all should do this. So trying to beat the algorithm or get the SEO in there, like I mentioned earlier, but it means signposting where to get started, right? How can we expect people to join our Linux app community highway if they can't find the on-ramp? And next, packages, software packaging brings with it a lot of now I don't need to poo-poo packaging. Like I've said, the technology. I spent all of about a month at Canonical as a Snap advocate before I was moved to the community team. This was not because of Snaps, but an internal thing. In that time, I snapped some things. I wrote about snapping. I learned about Linux applications, and I learned about packaging. Now, as I say, the technology is great, really interesting, and super useful, but the drama is less so. There are some wonderful people in the community who are incredibly constructive and helpful and who get it. And I've virtually messaged numbers of them here at this conference, and it's been great. And there are people who talk about packaging software like it's an extremist branch of a religion. Now, far be it from me to wade into those waters any more than I already have. But for the sake of the Linux app ecosystem, I think we need to find a better way to deal with these issues. If you have ideas, let me know. Maybe we can start a movement. And third and finally, I think we have a unique opportunity with the coming of more Linux-compatible mainstream ARM hardware to solve both of these issues and get ahead of the game. As a Brit, I've been following the acquisition of ARM with a keen eye. The pros and cons are, of course, enormous. And one way or the other, there's going to be a lasting impact on ARM and the general hardware landscape that's out there. If it goes ahead, in theory, possibly, just possibly, there is a huge opportunity to regroup and to kick Linux apps into a new gear. There's a lot of possibility, but if we use this opportunity to get some semblance of coherency, give Linux applications common ground, get them out there ahead of the pack, people, new developers, old developers might take notice. Heck, I know folks at NVIDIA and ARM will see this. They take notice themselves, but it's up to Linux app developers, folks like you guys and girls, apologies, you folks, you people watching, to make it happen. Again, if you have any ideas, I'd like to hear them. We can start a movement. So, hold on, Carlos. Can I just say a few more things? Thank you. So thank you, everyone. As I mentioned a couple of times, if you have questions or would like any more help, I'll get to the questions in the shared notes in a second when I open it. I have some advice to give. So if you'd like help, I don't know, Google juicing your articles, let me know. If you want to talk about the Ubuntu community or have a project idea that I might be able to help you with, or you want to shout at me for being an idiot and you don't like this talk, these are the places on screen. You can find me. Come and say hello. And I'll shout out now to keep an eye on that Twitter address on screen and the Ubuntu discourse, because we have some interesting things going in the Ubuntu community. And just before I get to the shared notes as well, I'd like to use this last slot to thank all of the organizers of the Linux App Summit on behalf of myself and also on behalf of Canonical for doing such a tremendous job and keeping on top of everything. I've been lurking in the organizers Telegram channel throughout the whole thing, and everything has been handled quickly and well to keep everything moving. So like Karen Sandler said on the day one, I hope everyone can give a silent applause for such a good event. Cool.
Indeed, great.
To the shared notes.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
No problem. What apps do you think are ideal for new beginning developers to convert or create either existing apps or general classes of apps? So since we're at the Linux App Summit, I'll stick to desktop applications, but the best ones are the simplest ones, I think, for getting started. The first application So I wanted to get into application development a long time ago, and I found sort of no-code tools and things to get things going before I found the Kool-Aid. And the best things I think to start with are the really, really simple things that you can make that would maybe fragmented, that you don't expect to make lots of noise about. Something like Stonker that you would use, even if it's not the best thing ever, because it doesn't really matter. So maybe something like a note-taking app, or a very, very simple note-taking app, or a very, very simple calendar, very, very simple timer. Something that you can do natively, and you can get your wheels turning. Something you could use even if no one else would use it, just because you've known, and then write about it, and then talk about how you experienced, what the experience was like for you, and then tell me about it, and then socialize it, and have a great time. 2. So in reality, the new Ubuntu installer that you guys at Canonical are writing in Flutter, and that's going to be released in the future, is going to work on the baked Raspberry Pi. Have you considered that? We have, and we are considering that still. Like you say, in reality, the new Ubuntu installer that us guys are writing in Flutter, that's going to be released in the future, is going to work. We're going to make sure that it works. I hope I haven't dropped the desktop team in it, but that is, I think, fair to say. 3, where can I find other people who are packaging snaps, who could help me debug snaps that I am packaging? Well, let me tell you here. Let me paste this in. This is the Snapcraft. Oh dear, that's not right. .snapcraft.io is the Snapcraft forum where you can sign up and join in and have all the fun. There are people from Canonical who are very, very regularly in there, including myself. But there are also a lot of community contributors and Snap people who are happy to help debug and talk about Snap packaging. And I'm frankly, a lot of folks in there I've seen talk about Snap packaging, and then if you come with your application and they see that maybe Snap isn't the best fit, we can point you in the right direction as well. But to address the first of my sort of calls to action here, I would encourage you to try and do the app, talk about your experience, try and look for packaging, talk about your experience, write about it, blog about it, and let us know, because we'd like to hear. Cool. I think that's all of the questions. Is that the end of my closing keynote?
Thank you.
Closing keynote.
Thank you for replying to the questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night or afternoon, wherever you are.